and we have to really escalate the noise we make so that we'll be heard.
Welcome to Gay USA. I'm Andy Hum, and welcome back.
I should admit at this point that I've decided in my old age to take like a week off a month. That's why I have taken a week off the last couple of months. So let's not make a big deal about my comings and goings. I'll be here most of the time, but occasionally I won't.
Okay, and there's a lot of news to go through.
Yeah.
The Secretary of the Air Force is now allowing anti-gay discrimination for religious reasons.
It's a charming story, and also charming is the White House finally admitting, and we'll do the whole backstory on this, that they have lied about their role in drafting the new ban on transgender troops.
And not only is the U.S. Census not going to count LGBT people, they say we don't need to.
Vice President Pence's hometown in Indiana is striking back a little, though. They're going to have their first Pride Parade organized by a local high school student.
Wait till you hear the vice president's response. A trans woman who devoted decades to the United States Department of Justice on civil rights is now joining Lambda Legal Defense.
To fight them. There's more of that going on. I like that. But the FBI has admitted its first trans person for training.
Does the president know about this? Well, he doesn't like the FBI anyway. Finally, a gay angle to the Mueller investigation, a little one.
And good news from Kansas and Georgia, which have dodged anti-LGBT legislation.
In Orlando, a judge has dismissed a lawsuit by the families of the Pulse Massacre victims, and a jury has found the wife of the shooter not guilty of aiding and abetting him.
A Tennessee court has told the legislature to butt out of the divorce of a lesbian couple.
In Costa Rica, the pro-marriage equality Alvarado is elected president over the anti-LGBT Alvarado.
Well, the voters were able to make the distinction. Grindr has been caught sharing data on the HIV status of its users with third parties.
And we're going to give you our take on Roseanne, the television show, and recommend 2 new Broadway shows.
One of which is transcendently wonderful, so please stay tuned for that.
They're actually both transcendently wonderful.
Okay, I didn't see the other ones.
Okay.
But we'll start with the Trump administration because they are transcendently horrible.
Well, just as we were coming in here on Wednesday as we tape, we learned about the fact that the Secretary of the Air Force has lifted the penalty on an officer who was found guilty, too, of not recognizing a gay airman's spouse. It was about signing some certificate of appreciation as this guy was leaving.
Yes.
It's a pro forma thing.
Yes.
He was the person responsible for signing it, and he said, it's a gay spouse, I can't do it, I have religious reasons. And he was disciplined for this. They had
in the Obama administration, under a previous administration in the Department of Defense.
So the bigoted representative Vicky Hartzler, you've heard of her. She's very much behind the transgender ban in the military.
More on that in a minute.
She wrote and made a fuss about this. They got senators to sign on. So the Air Force Secretary, Heather Wilson, says,
who is another right-wing former representative.
We don't discriminate on the basis of sexual orientation, and that this was signed by a more senior officer, no harm, no foul, and she overruled the initial finding of discrimination, which got this guy suspended, this guy Bohannon.
And his promotion possibilities cut off.
But here's the kicker. Tony Perkins from the American Family Association.
Family Research Council.
Family Research Council was behind a lot of this. His quote, President Trump has had to walk a long and determined road to weed out the bureaucrats still loyal to the intolerance of the last administration. Oh boy.
See, here's the deal. The United States military is a civilian organization. I know that's hard to keep in mind, especially in the Air Force. We're at the Air Force Academy. All the chaplains are anti-gay and are encouraged to be so. But it is a civilian, a publicly funded organization.
Yes, the commander-in-chief is our duly elected president, Donald Trump.
Yes, so to allow public funding of discrimination for religious reasons runs counter to the values and principles of the United States of America. So nonetheless, Colonel Bohannon has been let off the hook, and he is back and reinstated in full honors so he can continue to discriminate against LGBT people in the military. Sad. But that leads us to the even larger question of what's going on with transgender troops in the military. Because the White House has finally admitted that they, in fact, wrote the memo about barring trans troops that they claimed the Defense Department had written and given them.
Yes, see, the whole deal was they're in court and they're losing over this. So the judges are saying, what does the military, you keep saying the military says something about this, what do they say about it? So Mattis put out this report, quote unquote report, that we could tell or was written by the Family Research Council and other right-wing groups. It was
Heritage Foundation.
All lifted from their anti-transgender literature.
Right.
We could tell that that's what happened.
Yep.
According to BuzzFeed, I guess, Mike Pence had a whole working group on this,
Yes.
which he denies.
Yeah.
And so this could undermine the fact that the White House was involved with this, and it's not just from General Mattis, could undermine them in the court cases.
Although we can't let Mattis off the hook entirely because he allowed his name to be used with this, and he had to make a choice about whether he was going to stand up and say, I don't agree with this, or whether he would allow them to exploit him to further their lies.
He let them overrule him.
He did. And I just want to take a step back on this because I don't think we can remind people too often how this happened, since the mainstream media seems to have lost the thread on this and always says, this came out of nowhere, we don't know how this happened, it's not going anywhere, and they're completely wrong about all of this. And it goes back to this Vicky Hartzler. And a year ago, almost a year ago, I think it was July of last year, the Congress was debating a defense appropriations bill. Vicky Hartzler wanted to put in an amendment that said the government will not pay for trans-related health care or surgeries. And that got voted down. She lost on that. So she...
Surprisingly. And,
yes.
And the Pentagon signaled we don't have a problem with this.
And so she and Tony Perkins and the rest of the right-wing crowd, both in the Congress and outside in these right-wing groups,
said to themselves, if we can't rely on the bigotry of the Congress, who can we rely on?
Which led them straight to the White House and allied with Vice President Pence. They all went in to see Trump and said, this is a disaster. We cannot take this defeat on our issue. And if you don't fix this, we are not going to vote for your defense appropriation bill. And you are going to lose, and you're going to get screwed.
Now, as always, he was not paying very close attention to the conversation. He says, oh, you want me to do it? He just banned transgender people entirely.
That's correct. He upped the ante. He got up one morning at 6 a.m. and tweeted out, no more trans troops in the military.
And he said, that's not what I was supposed to do? Well, it's done now.
And that's where it came from. And the mainstream media, even though this has all been written about and all put out there publicly, they never caught on to this, so they continue to promote the fiction that this was just a figment of his imagination.
Well, our judicial system, such as it is now, did catch on to it, and they've overruled him several times.
Well, because he lied and said that the generals were the ones who told him to do this instead of Vicky Hartzler and Tony Perkins. So our side all went to court with different court cases all over the country. We won all those court cases. We brought out the Rand Corp study that said there was no harm with trans people serving. Mattis and Dunford and the other generals all supported trans people serving. But now we're getting to the deadline of when they had to actually follow through and all that. And that's when this latest thing came up where they claimed the generals had given them a new report saying trans people should not be serving and it was too expensive and too disruptive. And now it turns out that all that was, again, written by Vicky Hartzler and Pence and Tony Perkins and all of them.
Now, what they're counting on is that there is a fig leaf, at least, of deference to the military on this, because some military leaders have signed on to this bigoted statement.
With a gun to their head.
Well,
because what choice are they given? If Mattis and Dunford and those guys stand up now and say, no, I'm fine with trans people serving, they're going to be out the door. And they have clearly made a calculation that it is more important for them to stick around.
So what do you think is going to happen? I mean, we've talked about this often when we talked about don't ask, don't tell.
We go back
No, we go back to court, but you've often said that there's this whole thing about judicial deference.
Not so much anymore. As I read more and more about this, I see that, in fact, this kind of deference, especially in the case where even though they put this fig leaf on with this new report, it is clear that that report is a lie and that the Rand Corp in-depth study is much more pertinent and real, and that the courts will continue to see the fiction that the administration is trying to perpetrate.
It's not the courts that ordered the integration of the military in the United States, as they did desegregation of schools. It was Harry Truman signing an executive order.
Sure, but it is now 60 years later, and the courts are hipper, and they have already litigated this a lot, and I am confident that the courts, up to the Supreme Court, there's an issue. Kennedy may finally be forced to choose one or the other on trans people, which he has not been really confronted with yet. But I am optimistic that we will continue to expose these right-wingers for what they're trying to do. But meanwhile, trans troops are suffering, their families are suffering.
Trans people are suffering, and we're going to talk again about the murders of transgender people.
But you're right.
They are devaluing trans lives, identifying them as the biggest threat to this country.
Stigmatizing.
We've got some good stories about this, too, by the way, later on.
Yeah.
All right.
So anyway, that is the up-to-date on the military stuff.
And if you missed the Easter parade in New York, Rise and Resist was out there. We have some pictures from the Easter parade on Fifth Avenue. That's right in front of Trump Tower with all the other revelers. Everybody gets dressed up on Easter parade Sunday there. But they chose the environment as their issue this year. And they had people like in the middle there in the white is Fussy Lo Mein dressed up as Sister Mary Wana. And some tourists from Japan. That was fun. And it was good to be out there. God, they're indefatigable, Rise and Resist. They're out there at everything.
Yes, they're doing great.
They campaign every month, I guess it is, for the impeachment of the president.
On Thursdays, I think. Yeah. Yes, Rise and Resist, a good group to check out. Now, on the Justice Department front, that's interesting. There is a long-time official at the Justice Department in charge, in fact, of the Civil Rights Division Appellate Section.
She started under Ronald Reagan.
Diana Flynn. She was there for decades. And
1984.
She is a trans woman. And she has now quit the Justice Department and is going to work for Lambda Legal Defense as their litigation chief. She'll be bringing these cases into court and arguing them in court, and that is a huge get for
against
Lambda.
her old colleagues.
Yes, exactly.
And Sharon McGowan of Lambda said there is a brain drain out of the Department of Justice that is not normal. Nothing is normal these days, of course.
I think that's happening across the board. And is this a little rebellion by the FBI? They have accepted Leslie Mumford, a trans woman who was a leader of a SWAT team for the cops in Colorado, as a trainee at their training academy. That's Leslie Mumford, and she will be entering the FBI National Academy as the first trans cadet or student or whatever.
But the census in 2020 will not be counting LGBT people. In fairness, they never did. in the main census.
Well, no, but what they do is, in the main census, is they count people living together and then identify them by gender to,
Well, that will still happen.
to figure out the same-sex couples.
Yes, that will still happen.
Okay.
How could it not? I mean, people are going to say that they're married. They will have, of course, they did finally pass this citizenship question. NGLTF is asking for an oversight hearing over all this, and Trump also removed LGBT questions from the National Survey of Older Americans, which had been added to the 2014 survey. So they're trying to erase us. But the Census Bureau says, well, there's no reason for collecting this data. That's not needed for any federal purpose.
Because we've cut out all data collection for LGBT people in every department, Department of Health and Human Services, HUD, whatever. We're just being made invisible, and that's fine. If we had full equality, we wouldn't need to make these distinctions. But in fact, we have found that when we do survey people, that we are disadvantaged and need some special attention.
Let's go to Columbus, Indiana.
Okay.
Columbus is a beautiful little...
I'd like to go to Columbus.
Oh, you've never been?
No. Have you seen the movie?
I visited. No. Oh, yes, there's a movie about it.
Yeah.
Because it's a small town where all these cutting edge modern architects have built all these buildings.
Yeah.
And I went through it with my friend Jed, and it's unbelievable in the middle of nowhere that all these buildings are there.
I'm dying to
Churches,
see it.
public buildings, etc. Go to Columbus, and there is a documentary about it. But anyway, they've never had it's the hometown of Mike Pence. And they've never had a pride parade, so they are going to have one on April 14th, organized by a high school student, Erin Bailey. She says, Pence is openly anti-LGBT, but that doesn't mean the rest of us in his hometown are. Good for her. But the Pence press secretary's response to this is, the vice president commends her activism and is heartened to see young people from his hometown get involved in the political process. It'll be from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. on 4th Street.
Well, he's learning the PR.
Well,
meanwhile, the Will and Grace...
Which is why he's more dangerous when he gets in.
Exactly. The Will and Grace creator and producer Max Muchnick has donated 1,100 copies of John Oliver's Marlon Bundo book, the takeoff on the Pence Bunny book, to every elementary school in Indiana.
All right, here's the gay angle on the Mueller investigation, if you missed it. I heard a lot about George Papadopoulos, one of the people under indictment who's turning state's evidence. He was in a bar going on and on about this in Chicago, where he said some things about Sessions being really involved in approving of everything he did, and it turns out to be a gay bar. That's the angle. It's the Hydrate in Chicago.
Pay attention to who's around you at these bars.
He was with his wife.
They might be... See, we're being gentrified out of existence.
I know, they're coming in, they're taking over.
Okay. Well, let's move on to other news. I think we've done the...
Yes, we have.
All right. In political news, we are awaiting the results from Alaska of the vote on an attempt to repeal Anchorage's gender identity and expression non-discrimination law. All the balloting is by mail, so it's going to take a few days before final results. We have about a quarter of the ballots in and counted, and they show the...
We got 53%.
The repeal attempt losing, but that's only a quarter of the ballots.
Right. And at the Southern Baptist Convention, the head of their executive committee, Frank Page, 65, we have a picture of him, has resigned over, quote, a morally inappropriate relationship. He won't give us the juicy details, but he said, I have embarrassed my family, my Lord, myself, and the kingdom. Well, that's rather grand, and he's out.
Yeah.
Not out of the closet that we know of, but he had a morally inappropriate relationship of some kind.
And we were sorry to hear of the death in California of Judge Stephen Reinhart. He was 87 years old. He was a famous judge on the Ninth Circuit, the liberal Ninth Circuit. He wrote amazing opinions in a lot of different cases, but particularly in the first Prop 8 case, ruling it unconstitutional.
Well, before that, I mean, he ruled in the Schwarzenegger case, which awarded marriage to gay couples, when they,
And he ruled against DOMA,
that's why we had Prop 8, because he ruled that we could have it.
Yes. So he was a good guy and famous as a great civil libertarian, and we were sorry to hear of his death.
Yes, absolutely.
In Alabama, Representative Patricia Todd, who is resigning, the only out lesbian member of the state legislature there in Alabama, she gave a farewell address, which got a standing ovation from the state legislature in Alabama. There she is.
She talked about the way she was able to get along with everybody, even though we disagreed on issues, which is nice to hear, I suppose. Even though, there were 2 out gay candidates running, one for her district and one for another district in Alabama.
One of them's an ex-Marine, I think, running for her district.
Well, I want to stay in Alabama. Well, this is a terrible story.
Yeah, okay.
Well, it's in Huntsville. A man named Sean Cole, 29, and his girlfriend, Khadijah Moore, were convicted of rape, sodomy, and sexual abuse of a child. The man had an 11-year-old son who they thought was gay, so they sexually abused him with the woman. She failed to show up the court date in absentia. They face life in prison for this. He was an autistic boy who lives in Georgia with his mother, and he'd been visiting his dad, and the dad picked up on the fact that he thought his kid was gay, so
He saw him with another boy, and he thought
awful.
They were acting that way. Back to politics, Cynthia Nixon is continuing her campaign for governor here in New York. She appeared quite cleverly, I thought, on the Wendy Williams show this week. And she got the audience really on her side. And Wendy's audience is not terribly political.
She's a very skilled performer who knows how to win the audience. That's what you have to do.
She got them involved in understanding some of the arcane politics in the New York State legislature. They were cheering her on. They were giving her big ovations. It was quite interesting to see that she could perform so effectively with that audience. And Wendy asked her about the role of black women in the campaign, and she talked about their fundamental importance to the Democratic Party, and if the Democratic Party doesn't pay attention to black women and to the Black Lives Matter movement, that they were going down the drain. And she also supported legalization of recreational marijuana for the tax revenues. Governor Cuomo is notoriously opposed not only to recreational marijuana, but to medical marijuana, which he has done everything he could to stand in the way of.
It is available in New York only on a very limited basis.
And not in a smoked variety, only in liquid form.
And we told you about how Cynthia Nixon was dubbed by the former outspeaker of the council, Christine Quinn, as an unqualified lesbian, so she has embraced the label and made a campaign button on it. Unqualified lesbian Cynthia for New York.
I get one of those buttons, but I like to think I'm a qualified lesbian.
Well, there's the other meaning of unqualified. Unqualified, with no, we're not qualifying it in any way, shape, or form. You are a lesbian.
Well, that does it. I'm getting a button.
Okay. The New York State budget was passed. It's a terrible thing. And it was held up, we told you, by a rogue Democrat who's an Orthodox Jew, Simcha Felder, who wanted no oversight over yeshivas by the state education department, and they caved into him in order to get the budget passed. This is the religious right in New York, which is supposed to be a liberal state, but we know better.
In Ohio, the ACLU and Lambda Legal Defense are suing to challenge the state's blanket refusal to change gender identification on birth certificates for trans people. Good news from Kansas and Georgia. Kansas
rejected a bill letting agencies refuse LGBT adoptions after the Senate approved it.
Yes, the Senate approved it, the House rejected it, but it now goes to conference committee. So while it seems to be dead, there is a slight chance it could be revived. We'll keep an eye on that.
Not until there is a silver stake through its heart.
But in Georgia, the legislative session ended without passage of the anti-LGBT adoption bill proposed
They
there.
tried everything they could do to get it in there.
But we ran out the clock, and therefore we're safe for a little while longer.
Okay.
Wonderful story from Iowa. The American Legion there has reversed a previous decision, and they will let a young trans male teen attend the summer boys' state program as an exception. But Emmett Cummings will go to this program that the American Legion runs every year to sort of train young men on politics and government. And when the American Legion is welcoming trans kids into their programs, I think that is a great step forward.
And a breakthrough in Wisconsin, where a woman named Rebecca Dallett won a seat on the state Supreme Court. This is the first time in 23 years that a liberal candidate that wasn't an incumbent has won a seat on the high court. She beat a reactionary, and Governor Scott Walker tweeted that this could be the start of a blue wave. Now there are now six out of the 7 members of the Supreme Court are now women, and it was a big defeat for the NRA.
It gives me hope for Tammy Baldwin in Wisconsin, who is running a very, very tough fight for re-election. And, you know, with Scott Walker in charge of the state, Tammy's got a tough fight. And I hope that if the voters of Wisconsin are coming out to elect this woman to the court, that they can also support Tammy.
In Louisiana, a high school principal had refused to allow a trans girl named Cami Pham, who we have a picture of, to use this as her picture in the yearbook, and also to walk in graduation dressed as who she is. They said, you got to tone that down. I'm sure the ACLU had a talk with the principal in Shreveport there at Southwood High School. So they reversed themselves, and that'll be okay. Yes, they did.
No, okay. I'm behind on that story.
Yeah.
In Tennessee, a court is refusing to let the legislature interfere in a lesbian divorce and custody question. The legislature had wanted to set some rules about parentage and custody, and the court said, forget it, this is none of your business.
And we told you how they were going after that out teacher in Mansfield, Texas. And I've learned, I don't think we knew this, that she has been suspended since September. And she's saying, if I'm fired by the end of the year, I'm going to sue about this. She sort of came out to the kids in various appropriate ways that they said were inappropriate, and she was just demanding a non-discrimination policy in the school. And she's getting a lot of support because she was twice Teacher of the Year.
Attention, lawyers in New Jersey. We won a victory last year or the year before when the Orthodox Jewish organization Jonah was forced to stop doing conversion therapy of teenagers. So what happened? They changed their name. They didn't change their policies. They didn't change their practices. They just changed their name. They are now the Jewish Institute for Global Awareness. The Southern Poverty Law Center is on this and alerted us to this case. It's nefarious. They're shameless.
Well, in California, a bill is moving through the Assembly to make any claim to be able to change sexual orientation or gender identity fraudulent business practice.
Well, that's exactly what it is.
Yeah, but they banned it for minors, M-I-N-O-R-S, young people. Now they're looking to ban it for adults as well, which we did in New York City, by the way, right? Yeah.
And I want to alert you to an event coming up at the end of this month that is of interest to families in New York City. The LGBT Community Center on West 13th Street is going to hold a session called Family Stories Workshop for LGBTQ parents and children aged about 5 to 12. It's going to help kids learn how to talk about their families. It's free. They're providing lunch. April 28th, 11 to 1 p.m. That's a Saturday, and you can find out more by emailing centerfamilies@western.org. at gaycenter.org.
I don't like the way Paul Mango is talking about us. He's a Republican candidate in the primary for governor in Pennsylvania, and he's running against another Republican named Scott Wagner, who actually sponsored the state LGBT rights bill. So he is accusing Scott Wagner of promoting dangerous bathroom laws that allow boys to shower with girls. These are the ads that he's running on television.
We are living in the transitional time between ignorance and unfamiliarity to a better way.
If we survive, it might be much better.
And I'd like to mourn Trip Zanaidis, 37 years old, killed in, you may have heard about the helicopter crash in Iraq that killed half a dozen people. I know here in New York we were mourning one guy, a firefighter, who died. Well, this guy, Tripp was a firefighter too. He also went to Stanford Law School and was on his third military tour. He works at a big local law firm here. But he was out at 15 and served as an out gay man in Iraq, and is a huge loss. Trip Zanaidis.
And terrible news from South Carolina, where a trans woman, Sasha Wall, was murdered in Chesterfield County, shot dead on Sunday morning. The police believe she knew her killer.
In Ohio, Franklin County courts are launching a domestic violence counseling program for same-sex couples. That's a good thing to do.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead, Orlando.
Well, in Orlando, first of all, the Pulse families of the people who died were suing social media companies for allowing ISIS to spread their messages on their sites, and the judge dismissed that suit this week.
Yeah, hard to do.
And then there was the case of, you all heard about the wife of Omar Martin being found not guilty. She had been charged with aiding and abetting his commission of a terrorist act and faced life in prison. She admitted that she knew that he was stockpiling weapons and watched ISIS videos, but a lot of it's turned on what they call a false confession. We shouldn't have a lawyer present, and so. And
she was, harangued by the cops for 12 hours or something.
The jurors saw her as naive and of limited intelligence.
Well,
and
what
kept in
she
the dark.
also was evidently.
And she didn't share his radical views.
And she was a domestic violence victim. She was someone who was harassed and punished by him repeatedly, and that's a very tough situation. There's also the evolving question of when he chose the nightclub and how he chose it. And the early stories when this happened, when this horrible massacre happened, were that he had cased the nightclub beforehand, that he had made repeated visits there, that people had seen him there, and that this led to questions about his own sexual orientation and whether this was about some conflict for him. But what seems to be true as these stories develop is that, in fact, he hadn't been there, and that he chose this location on the spur of the moment the night he did it, and it was not his first choice of a location.
It was sort of the easiest target.
He had first wanted to go to a Disney facility, had found them too well guarded, and then just started Googling nightclubs in Orlando.
Not even gay nightclubs, just nightclubs.
And so it really downgrades any thought that he had done this deliberately to the gay community.
Glenn Greenwald has written extensively about this for The Intercept and says that there's just no indication, even when he was doing it, he was talking about ISIS, but he wasn't spewing anti-gay hatred. He killed 49 people who went to a gay club, and most of whom were LGBT.
There was even a quote that he walked into the club to start shooting and said, "Where are the women?" There were women there, by the way, and women who were victims. But I think there is an enormous and completely understandable rage and despair on the part of surviving friends and family who want someone to blame, some catharsis of punishment for someone. So when the wife has been exonerated, there is a lot of anger about that and a lot of concern that that's inappropriate. But I don't think we have any way at this point of finding some reason to pin this on her.
And it looks like we're not going to get justice in Arizona anytime soon. You know, the voters in Tempe went to the polls, and 90% of them voted to expose the donations to nonprofit groups in political campaigns. And the Arizona legislature just says, "Oh no, you don't. We're not letting you do that." So much for local control.
I think
a big Republican principle.
They have They have a personal agenda going there. We're not telling you who gave us the money and whose interests we might be voting for as a result.
All right.
International news?
Please.
Okay. Well, let's start with marriage international news, and specifically how big a issue same-sex marriage was in the presidential election in Costa Rica. We do have the coincidence of both candidates being named Alvarado.
But Carlos won, and he, I think he's with the ruling party, and he got 61% of the vote in the runoff, even though the late polling said that he was going to lose. But he beat the anti-gay fundamentalist Fabrizio Alvarado, and he is also Carlos is at 38 the youngest president ever, and he's pro-marriage equality.
Now the good news is that the Christian evangelist same-sex marriage candidate who lost graciously said after the election, I respect these results and we're all together and we're all going to be happy. The bad news is that during the campaign there was so much rancor over this issue because same-sex marriage became the prime issue in the campaign after the ruling by the Inter-American Court of Human Rights.
Which was in a Costa Rican case.
Yes. That LGBT people in Costa Rica suffered a lot of attacks and harassment.
As they did in the United States when this was put on the ballots all over the country.
In Bermuda, where they have delayed the repeal of same-sex marriage pending more court decisions and stuff like that, a second lawsuit has been filed by Out Bermuda, the local equal rights group, and
this one sounds a little bit better.
Yes,
and backed by Carnival Cruise Lines, who are nervous about losing business.
Yes,
and it's going to be heard by the Chief Justice in May.
And we have won this case before in the courts, and then the legislature tried to overturn that by passing the repeal.
And the legislature delayed the implementation of their ban on same-sex marriage until after the court cases, basically.
It's confusing. They go back and forth.
But in Singapore, the government announced that the marriage between a
wife and a husband who is now a trans woman.
Right. They said that it's now a same-sex marriage and it's illegal. Now, this doesn't happen in the United States when people transition. They don't unmarry them.
Well, it used to in Texas, county by county. They had different rules in counties about who was recognized as what.
They married as a man and a woman in 2015, and they're suing over this dissolution of their annulment of their marriage.
In Japan, in the city of Fukuoka, which has 1.5 million people, they have decided to issue partnership certificates to same-sex couples.
Very good.
This is a step forward in the potential legalizing of same-sex marriage.
Another step backward in Indonesia, where 4 men detained in the Aceh province, that's the one where they already have Sharia law, they're trying to institute it across the country, they were arrested on suspicion of having gay sex. They were rounded up by vigilantes. And if convicted, they face 100 lashes, and Human Rights is demanding that they be released.
In Pakistan, a trans woman was murdered. 55 trans people have been killed in that province in Pakistan in the last 3 years.
In Toronto, the police are not going to be marching in the Pride Parade in 2018 at the behest of Pride Toronto and 5 other groups. The police chief says, we're trying to be more sensitive to community concerns. They're very much under fire for the way they mishandled the disappearance of gay men. That turned out to be the murders of gay men for a long time.
The serial killer.
And in 2017, they were banned from marching in uniform, so they're just not going to participate this year.
And in Russia, they have banned the website gay.ru, which stands for Russia, because the pro-gay content on that site. Now, the site says it's only for people over 18, and the law bans promotion of non-traditional sexual relations for minors, but the government is saying this website is inappropriate and this stuff has to go.
In Brazil, many...
Our friend Putin.
Yeah. In Brazil, many prominent people are calling for an investigation into the assassination of the out lesbian council member, Marielle Franco, which was so horrendous. Among them, Angela Davis and Ta-Nehisi Coates and Janelle
Monáe.
Janelle Monáe.
Janelle Monáe.
Yes.
Wow.
So that's attracted. And in South Africa, there's a groundbreaking new film called The Wound, about a coming-of-age story of gay men, young gay men falling in love, and the government has given it the same rating as a pornographic film, so the filmmakers are going to court over that in a country that is supposed to protect people on the basis of sexual orientation in the Constitution.
I wonder what they'd think of Love, Simon. AIDS news. Well, watch out if you're a Grindr user. It turns out that
There are 3.6 million of you around the world.
Only 3.6 million?
That's what it says.
Well, they, like other websites and whatever, sell data to companies that do analytics and turn this over to advertisers.
You are not the
stuff.
customer, you are the product.
Yes, definitely. So on Grindr, people have the opportunity to check off boxes announcing their HIV status and whether they're on PrEP and stuff like that. So all that information went to these two analytics companies, and when that was figured out, big uproar. Grindr says it is now canceled selling that data to the companies, but it's gone.
We were just trying to support the health and safety of our customers,
Yeah.
they said.
Well, CVS, the pharmacy, is being sued for sending out 6,000 letters in Ohio that, you know, the little clear box with the address and an envelope, they put in a letter, you read the address through the window. Well, it turns out through that window you could also read people's HIV status.
God.
So they're being sued.
And if that's not bad enough, super gonorrhea is on the loose. We've talked about this before. It's the kind that cannot be cured by any known antibiotics. It was picked. The case that they found now is a case from a woman in Southeast Asia that's gotten to the West. And the CDC says, here's the deal. The CDC says the gonorrhea is up 63% in the last 4 years in America. It can be orally transmitted, and you won't even have symptoms. So we've really got to get on the
Well, they're
ball.
telling people you need protection in oral sex, and that's going to be tough for
They're
people.
even worried about deep kissing, because, and again, you won't have symptoms in your mouth, but then you have oral sex on a genital, and you transmit it there, and if it's the super one, you're in trouble.
Yeah. Well,
Sorry
after
for the
that
bad
good
news.
yes, let's move on to entertainment news, because we do have good news here. Where do you want to start?
Well, I mean, let's just start. How often do we get to recommend 2 Broadway shows?
Okay.
You and I saw 3 Tall Women Together by Edward Albee. This is a
Oh,
revival.
my God.
This is with Glenda Jackson and Alison Pill and Laurie Metcalf. It's a very autobiographical play for Albee about his mother. And I don't know if we should just most people understand the conceit of the play. Glenda Jackson is the old woman who's 92, is dying. But in the first act, Laurie Metcalf is her caregiver, and Alison Pill is a representative of her lawyer. And in the second act, this is the same woman at all 3 stages of her life. And it is such an interestingly constructed play and moving play, really.
This is the first time I've seen this play. I missed it when it was originally produced years ago.
or something.
Yeah, and I always regretted that. I love Albee, and I felt this was the one that got away. So when I saw that, when this was announced with Glenda Jackson, I thought, oh my God.
She's back from politics.
I'm ready to
acting
go camp out on a sidewalk for 3 months to see this. Glenda Jackson was. I am old enough to remember Glenda Jackson in her glory and to adore her. And yet, when I went to see it, I thought, can this really live up to my expectations?
Well, the first act, of course, is her just being a cantankerous, dying woman, rather repellent, and it's kind of hard to watch.
Wow.
But it all comes together in the second act.
all of which is played together. There's no
Yes.
intermission. They put the two acts together.
And the ghost of Edward Albee is on the set, unidentified. We don't know who was playing him, and it looks exactly like Edward as a young man.
Well, this play is so miraculous. I cannot recommend it highly enough. It is astonishing. And Glenda Jackson's performance, it's this weird experience of sitting there and being so astonished by the performance she gives, and
She's in her 80s, too.
she's 83. She never misses a beat. She has an enormous amount of dialogue, and every nuance of her mannerisms, her delivery, it is miraculous.
Yes.
And yet, at the same time that you're sitting there admiring all this and just with your mouth hanging open, you're so astonished, you're totally caught up in the play. So it's not a distanced experience, it's just this feeling of overwhelming admiration for the play itself, for the way she carries it off. Laurie Metcalf is astonishing as always.
And very funny, by the way.
Oh, lots of humor in this play. And Alison Pill just becomes kind of an afterthought. I like her in her movies and TV stuff, but Glenda Jackson is literally transcendent in this, and the play is fantastic.
I would say Alison Pill has a more revelatory role in the second act when she plays her as a young woman.
Yes.
Because she's struggling with, am I going to end up like you?
Yes. But going up against Laurie Metcalf and Glenda Jackson, she is necessarily a third wheel.
And they are lining up for Three Tall Women, but they're also lining up to see Chris Evans in Lobby Hero. He's an action hero in the movies, right? But it's a fantastic, again, small ensemble. It's by Kenneth Lonergan, who did Manchester by the Sea and won the Oscar for that. Chris Evans, Michael Cera in the background there, the young actor, nerdy actor, that's the role. Brian Tyree Henry and Belle Powley. It's a moral tale about conscience. That's all I'm really going to tell you. And it's also very funny and very surprising. It's in the Helen Hayes Theater, which used to be called the Little Theater, and it's an intimate experience and very, very good.
I guess I made a mistake not going to see that.
I think so.
But since we have a little time, I will indulge myself by going back to Angels in America. You read a few lines I wrote last week about that. Again, along with Three Tall Women, clearly the best thing I've seen in many, many, many years. I saw the original production 25 years ago and adored it then and was totally swept away. And thus I was a little reluctant to go to this one.
You hesitated.
I did hesitate. And in fact, I said no at first. And then I thought, oh, well, I really should go see it. And nothing will surpass the original cast for me in the original production. But I got totally sucked in. I really
when it
loved
premiered,
it.
we didn't have an effective treatment for HIV.
That's true.
It was 1993, and we didn't.
But it's so much bigger than that, and again, it's a not to be missed theatrical experience.
Nathan Lane, Andrew Garfield. Lee Pace.
And Denise Gough, who plays Harper, just was my favorite. And certainly anyone who watches this show knows that I have a habit of walking out of a lot of things and being very disappointed in theater, and really I'd prefer to watch television.
If you were lucky enough to go to a play where Anne walks out, I go to the last row and get somebody to come sit with me in the front.
Or even hand the tickets over to...
yes, and I go sit in the back.
Yeah.
You get a different perspective.
But the point is, I have a very, dicey relationship with theater. But these two plays, if you have any opportunity to be in New York and see these two plays, I guarantee you it will be an important moment in your life to see the revival of Angels in America and the revival of Three Tall Women.
Well, now, it was a great week for me in the theater, and I don't often have one. And this week, I got to see Broadway Backwards. It's a benefit for Broadway Cares and the LGBT Center. And it's women singing men's songs and men singing women's songs. It's always very moving. Hosted by Julie Halston, who was absolutely hilarious and sang a song, but Len Cariou came back and sang a song.
Oh my God, I saw him in what, the original Follies?
Yes. Michael McElroy and Brian Terrell Clark did What About Love very intimately from The Color Purple. I mean, they were making out on the stage. They were. And it's all...
Cute.
It was very cute. Not just cute, but kind of... Titus Burgess sang, "Happiness is a Thing Called Joe" from Cabin in the Sky. And Andrea Martin did this song from Avenue Q, "My Girlfriend Who Lives in Canada," which, Rob the Closet Case sings in Avenue Q. So congratulations to the executive producer, Tom Viola, and the director-writer, Robert Bartley, who puts these things on. Haley Mills came out and read some of the credits for the thing. I was thrilled. And our friends Steve and Matthew were there.
Oh, yeah?
Yes. That was fun.
Very cute.
Yeah. Love those shows. Anytime there's a Broadway Cares benefit, they do a wonderful job. They just do a terrific show.
Well, before we get to television, do you want to talk about Call Me By Your Name? You
Sure.
were going to talk about it last week and ran out of time. And thank you, by the way, to Gabe Gonzalez for sitting in here last week.
Well, Call Me By Your Name, the gay-themed movie, won the Oscar for screenplay for James Ivory. He is calling BS on the lack of frontal nudity in the movie. And he said, I wrote it in there, but the director, Luca Guadagnino, wouldn't go there. And the non-gay actors, there they are, Timothée Chalamet on the right and in the center, Armie Hammer, had it in their contracts that they didn't have to do it. So, and he just said, I find it so distracting when people like cover up when they get out of bed and things. It just makes you conscious of, it breaks the moment. And he said there's no reason to do that. And he was very upset that they didn't do it here. And they also panned away from the sex scenes for the gay ones and not for the non-gay ones, which was...
Well, that bothers me more. The nudity, I mean, the nudity can be distracting too.
Well, I agree with him that whenever I see people under the covers when you wouldn't be under the covers in bed, I'm like, why are they doing that?
I'm so used to seeing that
What's wrong with the body?
TV.
Well, I mean, I certainly cover up, but
Well, exactly. But when they are unequal about sticking with the just the affection between the couple of same-sex versus opposite sex, that's ridiculous.
I mean, James Ivory, of course, his director was his partner, Ismail Merchant. We have a picture of them. They
weren't entirely out either.
That's what I'm going to talk about, because that was the original point of this story. Leave them up there. They made films together. When they made Morris in 1987, set in 1900 or something, they did a very natural nudity scene after James Wilby and Rupert Graves made love. Anyway, he was asked in this interview in The Guardian, well, why weren't you guys out? Everybody kind of knew you were a couple. Mm-hmm. And he said Ismail Merchant was from a Muslim Indian family, and it was just unheard of. And there was just no way to, that's what he said, there was no way to do it. I mean, they never lied about it. They never pretended to be anything else, but they were not out.
Well, whatever.
Okay, I learned something this week. Oklahoma is coming to the St. Anne's Warehouse in the fall. I didn't know it was, I knew it was based on a play called Green Grow the Lilacs, but that play was written by a 29-year-old gay cowboy named Lynn Riggs. And Stephen Sondheim said he detected a subtext of the loneliness of gay life on the prairie in the play.
I went to speak at a college in northwestern, very rural Minnesota years ago, and did my, speech to an auditorium of several hundred people. Hi, I'm your local lesbian, not so local there, and did the usual presentation that we used to do. And one of the guys who came up to talk to me afterwards identified himself as a gay farmer, cowboy, who was kind of isolated out there in rural Minnesota, but he was very relaxed about talking to me, and it was fascinating to meet him and have him tell me about his
we did the story
struggles.
about the gay rodeo star last year, remember, from Australia?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, can we move to TV now?
Well, we got to talk about Roseanne.
Okay.
So it was a ratings hit and got congratulations from Trump. It did deal with a gender non-conforming grandson. although not specifically transgender in a specific way.
This has become quite the controversy because on the show, this is Darlene's son. Darlene has 2 kids on the show, teenagers, a girl and this kid, and who dresses in traditionally female clothing a lot, and is challenged by Roseanne and Dan, his grandparents. Well, are you a boy or a girl?
And they're worried that he's going to get beat up in school.
And he says, I'm a boy. I just like to dress like this. And so now there's some controversy because there are activists in the trans community who say, oh, this is just, this is right-wing stuff, this is anti-trans stuff that denies the existence of trans people. This is inappropriate, and they're up in arms. And I think there is some argument to be made that certainly there is a spectrum of people's identities in the world, and this is a depiction of someone who would be described certainly as gender queer.
Gender nonconforming.
Absolutely.
But so are we.
But we haven't any evidence yet that they're out to undermine trans identity. A little more disturbing is that Sarah Gilbert, who plays Darlene, who is now one of the producers and creators of this reboot, was asked about the son, and she says he's too young to identify as gay. Well,
that's ridiculous.
Come
well,
on.
I tell you, the people putting together the show don't know much about gay people. I mean, Roseanne was...
She is a lesbian.
Roseanne... Well,
and Wanda Sykes is working at it, too.
Well, Roseanne was interviewed by Patrick Healy, an out gay reporter at the New York Times, and was asked about, you know, you're a big Trump supporter, your character's a big Trump supporter, you know how anti-gay is. He is not anti-gay, she says ignorantly, because she doesn't know anything.
Because she doesn't watch Gay USA.
Well, you don't have to watch, we just have to look at all the anti-gay appointments that he makes all the time. Yeah. So a lot of people think the problem with the show, if there's a problem with the show, it might also be the normalization of Trump. But Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, a great liberal, says that the show is relentlessly criticizing Trump and his policies and is the most subversive show on television. I don't know about that. I kind of hope so, but I don't know.
Well, they're 3 episodes now. They have a short run, and they've already been renewed for next year. They have some evolving to do. We'll see how they do.
Why isn't Trump castigating Roseanne for the way she handled the sacred national anthem, which he criticizes black people for? She's the one who sang it totally off-key and grabbed her crotch while she was doing it.
What has he done that he is ignoring in his past? Now, American Idol. American Idol has had a mixed history with LGBT contestants, but this year in their reboot, they are coming out swinging. And now in the final 24, which will be whittled down, they have 2 amazing contestants, a young lesbian named Journey, 18 years old, her wife, who's in the military, prominently featured on the show. I think they're really riding this storyline.
And the credits are rolling.
And Adam Sanders, also known as Ada Vox, a drag queen performer. Now there's a question about whether he'll perform as a male or in the drag character. He is also totally amazing. So American Idol has a lot to offer at the moment. And welcome back, Billions, and the non-binary Taylor character played by Asia Kate Dillon, doing a fantastic job.
And Bill wants to recommend Ruby Rims at 88's on what day? Saturday.
At the Metro Baptist Church, a benefit performance.
All right.
See you next week.